equally acceptable for men and women to get tattoos. Although you'll notice that we do have divisions by sex. We think that some areas of the body are more acceptable for men, some are more acceptable and more common for women as well. So in terms of what this means for folkways and taboos, we have some unwritten rules still with tattoos. For example, some tattoos are more accepted, more benign than others. Women very often get tattoos on their ankle. It's considered kind of a feminine place to get a tattoo. Then you might be breaking a folkway in some parts of the country, in some societies, if you got a full sleeve tattoo, if you got a tattoo from shoulder all the way down. Okay? So anytime you wore a t-shirt, you would see all of that. In some parts of America, that would be considered a lot of tattoo. In other parts, nothing. So you might be breaking a folkway or you might not. On the other hand, there is one place where getting a tattoo is still pretty taboo. And that is, it's someplace I can talk about, don't worry, it's actually your face, okay? Facial tattoos. You very rarely are going to see people with them. Sometimes you will. And certainly sometimes in other countries, they're actually a part of society. I'm thinking of the Maori people of New Zealand who are full of, beautiful traditional facial tattoos. However, in the United States, facial tattoos are pretty much still considered a taboo thing. Some of them have special meaning in prison and in gangs. So that may be where part of the taboo comes from. Part of the taboo is likely that they might present an employability barrier for people in certain professions to get a job. And they're actually so taboo that even some tattoo artists won't do them. They refuse because they think they have such a big impact on people's life that, it's such a big choice that people really don't understand the full ramifications of it. So that one area of tattoos is still taboo. But one thing I will tell you about taboos is they change. So who knows what we'll believe about facial tattoos, maybe in 10 or 20 or 30 years from now. And I'll give you a couple of other examples of folkways and taboos. Eating is a favorite subject of mine to talk about as far as taboos go, because food is a very common subject of folkways, things we should do, and big taboos even, things that we should not do. Some religions taboo certain foods, such as pork or beef, and it's absolutely unacceptable to eat those things. We also have folkways about food as well. For example, it's very acceptable to put ketchup on French fries, okay? But maybe if you're an adult, if you're a kid, you can get away with putting ketchup on just about anything. But if you're an adult and you sit down for a very fancy dinner with a big, beautiful filet mignon at a very fine restaurant, and you ask for the ketchup, even the waiter is going to look at you a little bit funny. And you'll know then that you have broken a folkway. Okay? But in terms of breaking a taboo, that might be a food that is actually forbidden because of religion. Or another taboo for some people traveling abroad might be to go to a country where an animal, for instance, that Americans keep as pets, like cats or dogs, in a lot of places in the world, they're eaten as food. And for an American traveling abroad to one of those places, they might be really repulsed to the extent that they feel it's a tabooed issue to eat what we consider to be a domestic animal. Okay? And now I'm going to go on to my final example, and that's on the subject of crime. Because so often when we think about deviant behavior, we also think about criminal behavior. And a lot of what we call deviant behavior is indeed criminalized, but not all of it. So even within the criminalization of behavior, we do have different levels. We have certain criminalized behaviors that are closer to folkways and others that are definitely taboos. And an example of that would be, an example of the folkway that one would break would be, say, shoplifting. Okay, that's a crime often, but not always, committed by young people. And sometimes, it's an impulse crime. people in the store with peers or people who can't afford something and put something in the bag. And it's one of those crimes where in the past some stores didn't call the police for it. Lately I think a lot more stores are prosecuting things like that. It's a crime that can go on someone's record, but it's a small crime, at least by judicial system standards, not usually a long sentence or a sentence, maybe community service, something like that. Still very serious in some instances, but nonetheless, on the levels of the whole spectrum of crime, it is more like breaking a folkway. On the other hand, at the other end of the spectrum of crime, we could take something like murder, which is a very tabooed crime. Also, highly criminalized. The penalty in the United States might go all the way up to capital punishment. You can actually be executed in our country and a few others for the crime of murder. So we know that it is a very tabooed thing. Even if you were convicted of murder and eventually let out, it would likely affect every area of your life, from relationships, in terms of people who found out that you had once been convicted of murder, to jobs, where people might refuse you jobs on the basis of that conviction. So you can see the big difference in scope from a crime like shoplifting. But here's the interesting thing. While I say that murder is taboo as a crime, we also have different levels of murders in the United States in the way that, sentences are handed out and what we consider the severity of it. And then we also might look farther afield, from criminal behavior. For example, we taboo killing a person, when it's a crime, but, are there times when society does not taboo killing a person? And that one is a little more, debatable. There are times when we call things justifiable homicide, for example. Or very often people are, killed in wartime, for example, where, much of society, most of society certainly doesn't, taboo that. Again, we see that often as a justifiable act. So, even with some very serious issues, like one person killing another person, society sets up different levels and different standards and perceives it in a different light. So I hope, after hearing all of these examples, that it's given you an idea of the very big difference from folkways to taboos, but hopefully you also understand that there's a really big spectrum from one to the other, and that how we look at these things and how we see them, and even what we do about the breaking of a folkway versus the breaking of a taboo, whether we do anything at all, is very situational and very much depends on, like so much else that we're going to talk about this term, the society that we live in. Have a great week.